to people doing good for others, where we celebrate, honor, and praise groups and individuals who truly make a difference in our community, who are significantly involved, who are giving and sharing and caring in significant ways. I'm Gary York. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you. We want to thank Wilkes Communications, River Street Productions, and 100.9 WIFM for this opportunity. And again, thank you for being with us. Our featured guest is Dr. Bill Davis. He's a longtime resident of this county, lives on a farm in Rhonda, has been a significant contributor to Wilkes Community College. He's a community servant and an individual whose heart is in the right place, who gives and cares and shares. And good morning to you, Dr. Davis, and I'm glad you're here. And let's talk about your legacy and your family's roots here in Wilkes County.
Well, thank you, Gary. I'm glad to be here and to talk with you today. I guess you were talking about Wilkes County. My great-grandfather, Albert Leonidas Hendricks, came to Rhonda, where I live now, in April the 19th, 1870s, when he bought the place. It was an old two-story log house. The part facing the river that we see now, you can't tell it, but it's log. And he built it to look like it does today, with the upstairs porches and the gingerbread work and so forth, to make it look pretty much like the time. We have it on the National Register of Historic Places, and they tell me it's kind of an eclectic version of Charleston, North Carolina, how some of the homes look there. And there was a trading path pretty much. It went from up in the Roanoke area all the way to Charleston. They come kind of by there, and as people were trading and going back and forth, a lot of the ideas and things, you know, were brought back home and passed on. And that's pretty much that part. As far as servant, my great-grandfather was, he was a member of the General Assembly in 1869, and that then later on he was a magistrate and served kind of as one of the local judges. He was a merchant and had a store there in Rhonda. It was a partnership with the Hickersons and the Gwynns and the Hendricks, and he lived there, had 11 children. The oldest child was my grandfather, and he, after raising those 11 children, he moved to Elkin and bought a house from T.L. Gwynn there, where the Presbyterian Church is now in Elkin.
Right.
And lived there back and forth. And later on, as years passed, my grandfather bought the house. My grandfather was born in the house. Later on, my mother was born there. It was my childhood home, and I lived there. I went off to college.
Let's back up just a minute and tell us where you went to school, elementary and high school, and someone might have encouraged you to go on to college.
Okay. Well, I went to Rhonda School for the first 2 years. I started school in 1944, and I went to Rhonda School, and at that time schools were pretty rural. My mom was working in Elkin, and she thought, well, the Elkin City schools might be better. And so I went to Elkin in the 3rd grade, graduated from Elkin in 1957, and then went on to college. I met my sweetheart in high school, Linda Line, and she was planning to be a nurse, and I talked her into going with me to Appalachian, and so we decided we were going there. And so we went to Appalachian, and she majored home economics, and I started out majoring in business education, and I didn't care a lot about the shorthand. So I changed my major to something else, and I majored in social science. We did her student teaching at, she did hers at East Wilkes. I did mine at Jonesville. I worked there a year, And then Mr. Carpenter, N.H. Carpenter, who was superintendent of schools at Elkin, asked me to come to Elkin and he wanted a driver education teacher.
Right.
Well, I wasn't too interested in driver ed, but it was an opportunity to go to Elkin, and in those days, you know, comparatively speaking, teachers didn't make a lot of money. I think I was making $322 a month that first year teaching school. And if I went to Elkin, I was going to get a $10 a month supplement.
Right.
And that sounded pretty big at that time. And so I went to Elkin, plus the fact that I had graduated from there, and I thought that would be pretty neat to go back to school and teach where you had gone to school.
So, Bill, let's fast forward, if you will, about getting involved with the community college system and eventually coming back to Wilkes and having those great years. Let's go there right now.
Okay. I can say that, first of all, that I didn't really have a plan to go to the community colleges. When I got my master's degree in '68, I wanted to become a principal. Well, there wasn't anything available at Elkin at that time for me to do. And we looked and thought about moving, and I was offered a position in Stokes County, and we had bought a house and we had it fixed like we wanted to, and we didn't really want to leave. And so I was offered a job at Surrey Community College. This was in 1968. And so we went there to work, and I was a counselor and director of financial aid. I was young and energetic and got involved with a lot of things, and that we were offered a position in Raleigh with the Department of Community Colleges. Community colleges were rather young at that time. All of them hadn't even been formed. And that I think at the time there were 56, and you know, now we have 58. 2 more were formed while we were in Raleigh. And that I was hired to be a program developer. And in that job there, I had different programs. There was a staff of us. We were called the Curriculum Lab. And that we would go out and help these colleges set up new programs, decide what kind of equipment they had to have, help write the curriculum for them, provide a framework of the kind of facilities they would need to have for their courses and so forth and so on. After doing that, my mother's health began to fail, and I, being the only child, felt the need to come back home or either move her to Raleigh.
And that was 72?
That was in 72.
Okay.
And I didn't know what to do. I was on that track, that like the traditional track to become a college president in one of the community colleges, and that I was doing all the right steps as I thought that I was supposed to do. And we had to decide whether to come back and forego that at the moment or what to do. And we decided, well, we had the farm. It needed to be taken care of. And being an only child, I felt the responsibility to come and to be nearby to look after and take care of my mother. So we moved back in 72, and I was offered a position at Wilkes Community College.
And you had 17 years there, right?
A little over 17, about 17 and a half.
Okay.
Yeah. And that Dr. Thompson hired me to come, and he not only did that, he got in touch with them in the public schools and got Linda a job at CBL. And so the package was put together for both of us. He even offered her, first of all, he offered her a job teaching early childhood at the community college. And she said, I don't like to work with adults. I like to work with little children. So she went back to the public school to do that. And she stayed there for 30 years before she retired in '98. But my work there at first at the community college was director of the division of life sciences. In life sciences, it had numerous programs. Had the biology, it had the nursing program, it had environmental science, food processing, poultry and livestock. We had a large program. It was called Agricultural Science and Mechanization. That was a veteran program for farmers. And if they went to school 12 contact hours a week, they could receive their GI benefits and learn how to farm.
Best practices and farming.
Right.
Right.
And we offered all kinds of classes in that program. Had welding, plumbing, auto repair, and carpentry. If they were all practical courses. And that program just grew like wildfire. It started out with a class of 25 or 30. And before we ended up with the thing, I think we had somewhere around 950 veterans that were enrolled in the program here in Wilkes.
Wow.
Also in Allegheny and in Ashe County, which is part of
So
the,
that was after the Vietnam era, and there are a lot of available
Yeah.
good men that were looking for opportunity then.
right.
Yeah.
And that the biggest task we had so many classes and so many taking them, was finding places to offer these classes, finding shops and things.
Wow.
Well, Mr. Bradburn, who was superintendent of school, was generous enough to allow us to use the ag shops in the high schools. The other counties did the same, and but we still had more than that. And so we were using garages, we were using anywhere we could find,
Find a way.
yeah, to have a class, and that it was a good, very good practical program.
You told me that your vision was about being an educational administrator, and we also had a time there I thought was very interesting in our prior conversations about building the Walker Center.
Yeah.
And that's 1982, and just let's go there for a while, if you will.
Okay. You're talking about the Walker Center? Or
Yeah,
just
the
in
Walker
general?
Center.
Okay. Well, when Dr. Howard Thompson came, or whenever he retired in 1977, we had built two new buildings, a technical arts building which had a gymnasium in it, and it was a nice classroom facility, and also a new power mechanics building. And this was built on the upper campus. And
Now that's up on the hill, is from administration building that's up
Yeah.
there, right?
directly behind Thompson Hall.
Yeah, to the west.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, of course, in the years that was being built in the late, middle, and late 70s, as you remember, there was very rapid inflation, and you could put out a bid for something in time that or the time the architects could determine what it was, and then you could bid for it. It'd be overbid every time, and we ran into that same, or Dr. Thompson ran into that same kind of experience with the technical arts building and the power mechanics. And the architects were saying to him, well, you just need to cut the size of the building, bring it in line with the money that you have available. And his comment was, which I thought was so wise, he said, if I cut the size of the building, he said, they'll always be that size. He says, I know that if I put those buildings up there, somebody will figure out how to get to them. And so he decided that what he did, he cut out the landscaping. At that time, to show you how much the inflation was along about 76, that those steps were to be built for $32,000. But when they were actually built, they cost $104,000. Wow. And that was really a blessing to the new president that came. He came with that challenge. He had those new buildings on the hill. He had no roads, no curbing, no anything up there other than just a dirt road that went up to them. No steps for the students to go from the lower campus to the upper campus if they had classes. And so one of his first tasks was to raise money to get those steps in place.
Tell us about that.
Okay. And that the good thing about David Daniel was he had come from a private school that had to raise money, so he understood it. Most of us either had a public school background, and we had never had to raise money or thought about it. And when the community colleges first started, they had more than adequate amount of money, and so therefore they they didn't worry about raising money because they couldn't spend all they had. I think that so I can remember when we were living in Raleigh, that some of the presidents would come down to the General Assembly, and they'd have a special recognition day for some of the presidents, and they would tell how much money they had saved the taxpayers because they were going to turn back some money that they had given them. And of course, you don't hear of any of that today. No. But anyway, at that time that David came and brought a different vision to the college from what we had before. And that even some of us wondered if his vision was just beyond reach. But in doing these steps, we decided that we would try to raise, that was our first fundraising project.
Now, this is to build the Walker Center?
No, it's going to lead to building the Walker Center.
All right.
I'm sorry. But we built the steps. We got a lot of people interested in the campus. They come to see that $100,000 set of steps because they'd never seen a set like that at that time. You think back in along about 77 and 78, $100,000 was a lot more money
right.
than it is today. Well, it led to, after the steps were built, that Dr. Daniel had one of the executives from Lowe's, John A. Walker. He came over to see the steps, and they were standing and looking at them. They were very beautiful steps. And David told Mr. Walker, he said, I have a vision for the college. Said, right over on this hill, just to the left of where we're standing, said, I can see a community center that has a large auditorium in it, that it's big enough that we can have a stage, a professional stage in there, and we can bring well-known artists and people here to come, and it'll be big enough that we can raise enough money through the ticket sales and so forth to support that type of thing. And also, he said, we need to have our culinary arts program needs to have a new kitchen. And said we can see that being part of this, and it can be a training complex for some of our business and industry people. Said particularly Lowe's, as he said to them, right. Because he was an executive there. And
I want you to give so much, right?
And no, he said, I see that, and he said that was what was coming. That was what was coming. But he said. Johnny Walker, he was not bashful at all, and he was quick to answer. And I think before David even said anything about any money, he said to him, he said, how about you getting some plans drawn up? Said, you let me see them. Wow. And so he immediately did that.
Now, how about the teachers? That was an interesting part. Can you just go to that?
Yeah, I can, but let me finish this just a second. That he said that he came back. And he said, how about, he said, I will give you $250,000 on this condition. First, you have to raise $500,000 from the county commissioners, and that you will be willing to see that you raise the rest of it. Okay. One of the things that David had done, he realized his role pretty much as a president, being really the interpreter of the college to the community and having access to significant people throughout the community.
Yes.
He had what they called a business industry advisory board. And on that board, he represented every segment of our business community. Even the Ministerial Association, the chairman of that sat on that board. They had an educator on that board. Almost every segment that you could think of was part of that. So of course that they knew about what David was trying to do. They understood his philosophy pretty much, and he had a lot of public support.
He was good at it, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was good at it. So that we had in the 70s, there were about 8 or 9 corporate headquarters here that had started in Wilkes.
Right.
And of course, those people had a lot of appreciation for Wilkes County because Wilkes County had made them successful. And so, wanted to make a long story short on the Walker Center, it took a lot of work by Jack Combs, who was the chairman of the county commissioners, to get 3 votes from the commissioners to give that $500,000. The one they had to focus on the most as a trustee of our college now is Tracy Walker.
Right.
Tracy would be for it one day and he'd be off of it the next day. But back and forth as politics goes, his arm was twisted tight enough that he finally said, okay, we'll do it. So the 500 came. That meant we had $750,000 with Mr. Walker's money, and that David immediately zeroed in on all of the businesses and industries that could make large gifts. Came in like this: Holly Farms $100,000, Northwestern Bank $100,000, Lowe's $100,000, and on till that part was done. But we were still short about $500,000 or $600,000. And as I was telling you about the business and industry advisory board, Mr. Bradburn sat on that board. And as David who was so good at telling how things were going and what he had planned, he looked at me. I was on that board at that time, and he said, Bill, he said, if you're going to do a phone-a-thon, we had talked about that and had proposed that to the board, and he says, I will have my teachers come and help make those calls for me.
Wow. So the public school teachers came to raise the money.
They came and helped. They came and
wow.
helped with that on that fundraiser. And what was so interesting about it was at that time I think there were about 22 when you count the elementary and high school schools in the county at that time. There are not quite that many now. But anyway, that each school would take a night. And the phone-a-thon was done Sunday night from 6 until 9 through Thursday night. We didn't do anything on Friday or Saturday night. Nobody's home on Friday or Saturday night. And that it got to be a competitive thing, because when each school, when they'd come, they'd want to outdo the other one.
Yeah.
And they would try to see if they could raise more money than the others did. So we started with a select group of people that we thought would be good prospects. And we went through those people in a hurry, which we raised quite a bit. And then we ended up calling everybody in the phone book. And not only did we have the public schools, we had the civic clubs
Sure.
who would come over and man the phones.
So it was
one
a
night.
community effort.
It was the community center was built by the community. And that's just a good way
What
to
a
put it.
great story, Bill Davis,
Yeah.
and thank you for sharing that as how you were in the middle of it, so you can bring it to us today in a very special way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, you're a trustee, and they're the men and women that set policy for our outstanding Wilkes Community College. And if you would give us just an overview of what, first, how do you become a trustee? And then just go from there, if you will.
Okay, well, I became a trustee because I was asked by the county commission back in 2011 to become a trustee. I had thoroughly enjoyed serving in that capacity and seeing what they do.
And when do you
being a
meet?
part.
How often do you meet? How many are
Okay,
there? How many?
there are, Wilkes Community College has 17 trustees.
Okay.
Now, they are appointed by the governor, who appoints 4. The Board of Education appoints 4. The commissioners appoint 4. Now, that's when you only have one county as an administrative unit.
Mm-hmm.
Since we serve 3 counties, we have two trustees from Ashe County and 2 from Allegheny County.
Right.
And then with the 17th one, the student body president at the college
Okay.
serves in an ex officio capacity, does have a voting right. So that makes the 17 that we have.
Okay.
But I think that the pretty part about the whole story is that when you go back to the beginning, when the college was created, and I think about those significant people that had a part in making the college what it is. Of course, the name that stands out the most to me is Johnson J. Hayes, who was a judge and a native of this county who grew up, went to Wake Forest, graduated from Wake Forest, became an attorney, and later on became a judge, and was a very, very influential man. And that he and John Idle, who was the associate superintendent of schools, he was the first assistant or associate superintendent Wilkes County ever had. Because, you know, originally they only had just a superintendent. There was no such thing as an associate. He became that, and he had the role of doing the research to determine if there was a need for one. So, and then
That was in 65?
this research was done in '64.
Okay.
And that then the other person that was very significant in getting the college here was Bob Strickland.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Strickland, who was an executive at Lowe's, but also was in the General Assembly, and he was one of the advocates for community college when that movement was taking place. And because of the research that Mr. Idle did, and also because of the influence that Judge Hayes had, and those and others working with Bob Strickland, we have
It's going to happen.
Well, it was going to happen.
Yep.
At first, you know, Surrey came along first, and
Right.
then Wilkes followed that.
Right.
But it was in September of '64 that that it was decided that we would have a
What do you guys and women, what do you do?
what
When
do
you
we do?
meet, when you have a meeting, just give us some idea.
Okay, well,
What happens?
the first thing I guess I'd want to say is that we meet 4 times a year.
Okay.
And that the other thing is the role is that the most important role we have is hiring a president. We hire the president, we evaluate the president, and we terminate the president. And that the role of
Dr. Cox.
Dr. Cox. But we go back to the first trustees at Wilkes Community College were appointed in January the 15th, 1965.
Right.
And that those significant people that I named, all of them have served as a trustee at one point in time or another.
Right.
But mainly our responsibility is to be advocates for the community college,
Okay.
to be policymakers,
Right.
to determine in accordance with North Carolina code law what the mission of a community college is, to be sure as the college is being managed that our programs and services reflect the mission, and that we are also responsible for ensuring that there's adequate money for facilities, money for instructional programs. We have the responsibility of seeing that the college is managed well.
Stewards of this asset.
Yes,
Right.
stewards, and guardians
Okay.
for the public. The other thing that I think that's important that we do, and probably we can even do better, is to be sure that we are advocates and interpreters to the community
Yeah.
of what the services are. Our citizens are interested in the services, but it's important that we share with them and tell them and explain to them what services are available. And as we learn things, that we can give feedback to the president.
Dr. Davis, I want to, we're coming close to the end. I want to thank Wilkes Communications for this opportunity. Our River Street Productions and 100.9 WIFM. And now just kind of pull it together and tell us how the opportunity to be an educator and to be an administrator, your life has been about doing good, and you've had an opportunity. Tell us what that opportunities mean in your life.
Well, it means a lot, I think.
In about 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Well, 15 seconds. I never intended to be an educator. My parents were, but when I went to college and did my student teaching, it was such an enjoyable experience. That I wanted to do it. And that I fell into it, and I enjoyed my experiences in the public schools, but I think that the work that I've done in the community college was more suited
You
for
have
me.
mattered, you are mattering, and you will matter. And God bless you for being here, and what an informative servant and a community servant and advocate, and you're a special friend. We thank you very much.
Thank you too.